It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020. In the quiet mountain town of Salida, Colorado, the world was still waking up. Birds in the pines, bikes on the trail, sunlight sliding over the Rockies. And somewhere along that winding road near County Road 225, a woman named Suzanne Morphew vanished without a trace. Her bike was found hours later. Her helmet tossed aside. No signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away. No sound in the woods. Only wind and pine needles. By sunset, her husband was calling 911. By morning, the search teams were combing the forest. And within days, the perfect Mother's Day had become the darkest mystery in Colorado. She was 49, a mother of 2, and a picture of a happy life. But what really happened to Suzanne Morphew that morning, before the headlines and police searches? Salida was just another postcard town in the heart of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. Locals remember it as a place where neighbors waved from their driveways and elk sometimes wandered too close to the highway. Life there felt safe, ordinary. Suzanne Morphew fit perfectly into that picture. A devoted mother of 2 teenage daughters, Mallory and Macy, she was known for her smile and her deep faith. She'd grown up in Indiana and moved west with her husband Barry, a successful landscaper and former firefighter. Together, they built a dream home near the foothills, surrounded by pine and silence. Friends recall Suzanne's energy. She hiked, biked, taught Sunday school, and battled cancer years earlier. "She was the strongest woman I knew," one friend said later. If anyone could survive the mountains, it was her. But there were also whispers, quiet, uneasy. In the months leading up to her disappearance, those close to Suzanne noticed something change. She seemed distracted, sometimes anxious. Her texts hinted at loneliness, her smile a little forced. Still, no one imagined danger. Not here, not in Salida. The morning of May 10th, 2020 dawned like any other. The sun rose behind Mount Shavano, lighting up the Morphew home. Inside, Suzanne opened her phone, sent a message to a friend, and then, sometime after that, she was gone. No one saw her leave. No one ever saw her again. Mother's Day morning began with the kind of stillness that only the mountains know. At 7 a.m., the temperature was cool, the air sharp with the scent of pine and wildfire smoke drifting from the south. Suzanne Morphew's phone registered one last ping near her home on County Road 225, a faint digital heartbeat that would soon fade into silence. Neighbors didn't see her leave, but investigators later believed she had gone for a short bike ride, something she loved to do on quiet weekends. The Morphew's driveway opened to a long, winding road that led straight into miles of trails and forest, perfect for someone looking for peace. By mid-morning, her daughters, away on a camping trip, were texting Happy Mother's Day. Suzanne never replied. When Barry Morphew, her husband, was asked where he'd been that morning, he said he'd left early for a landscaping job near Broomfield, almost 3 hours away. He claimed he texted Suzanne at 11 a.m., but she didn't answer. Around 5 p.m., a neighbor noticed something odd. Suzanne's car was still in the garage. Her bike was gone, but no one had seen her on the trail. Concern turned quickly to fear. That evening, Barry returned home and found the house silent. Her purse was inside, her keys, her shoes, everything except Suzanne. At 5:46 p.m., he dialed 911 and told dispatchers his wife had gone biking that morning and never returned. Within hours, Chaffee County deputies were on scene. Search teams arrived before midnight. Flashlights cut through the trees. Dogs followed scent trails that went nowhere. Somewhere in that still mountain air, Suzanne had disappeared. Completely. When Barry Morphew spoke to police that night, he sounded exhausted, frightened and confused. He told them he had left home around 5 a.m. for a landscaping job in Broomfield, near Denver. A job, he said, that required him to stay overnight. He claimed he last saw Suzanne asleep in bed, peaceful, just like any other morning. Barry insisted his wife must have crashed her bike or gotten lost in the woods. "She loves the outdoors," he told deputies. "She knows those trails like the back of her hand." But something didn't sit right with investigators. The timeline felt too neat. The landscaping job was never officially scheduled. And when police examined his truck's GPS data, they noticed inconsistencies, stops that didn't make sense, routes that doubled back toward home. A neighbor described Barry's behavior that evening as restless. He was pacing, making phone calls. He looked worried, she recalled, but not the way a husband should be. In interviews, Barry often broke down in tears, pleading for Suzanne's safe return. He recorded videos begging anyone with information to come forward, but when those videos aired, viewers noticed his tone, too controlled, too rehearsed. Over the next few days, Barry cooperated with police, but only up to a point. He declined a polygraph test, citing legal advice, and when detectives asked about his marriage, he said everything was perfect. Yet Suzanne's friends painted a different picture, one of distance, tension, and messages she'd sent shortly before disappearing. And somewhere between those two versions of the truth, the case began to fracture. The first search began before dawn on May 11th. Chaffee County deputies, search and rescue crews, and dozens of volunteers spread out across the pine-covered hills near the Morphew home. Drones hovered over canyons. K9 units traced every path, every trail Suzanne had ever biked. A few hours later, about a mile from her house, deputies found her mountain bike, lying on its side, half buried in brush, as if placed there. The frame was intact, no blood, no skid marks, no sign of a crash. Nearby, another discovery, a bike helmet, resting almost too neatly near the edge of the trail. Investigators immediately felt something was off. "It looked staged," one officer later said, "like someone wanted us to believe she'd fallen here." Teams scoured the riverbank and nearby ravines for any sign of Suzanne. Nothing. Not a shoe print, not a piece of fabric, not a drop of blood. Even the scent dogs couldn't pick up a trail beyond a few hundred yards. Locals began whispering that the woods had swallowed her whole. Others thought something darker had happened long before that bike ever hit the dirt. At the command post, officers pinned maps, drew circles, and logged every lead. The sun dipped behind the mountains as day one ended. The forest grew silent again, heavy with unanswered questions. By that night, investigators were already asking each other a quiet, dangerous question. One they couldn't yet say out loud. Was this really a missing person case? Or had something far worse happened inside that house on County Road 225? By the second day, the story had spread beyond Salida. Helicopters from Denver news stations hovered above the forests, their cameras scanning the jagged ridges of the Rockies. Local reporters gathered at the sheriff's command post, microphones aimed at the exhausted deputies who could only say, "We're following every lead." Hundreds of volunteers joined in, neighbors, church members, even hikers from nearby towns. They combed through tall grass and creek beds, shouting Suzanne's name into the silence. The sheriff's office set up a public tip line. Calls poured in from across the country. Barry Morphew appeared before cameras, voice trembling as he offered a $100,000 reward for Suzanne's safe return, later doubled to $200,000 when family friends added to the fund. "We just want her home," he said. "Please, whoever has her, please let her go." For a moment, it seemed the community was united in hope. Blue ribbons lined fences and mailboxes. Church bells rang each evening at sunset. But as days turned into weeks, that hope began to unravel. Detectives quietly admitted there was no sign Suzanne had ever left on that bike ride. No confirmed sightings, no cell tower activity, no footprints along the trail. What began as a rescue mission was slowly turning into an investigation. And while the cameras filmed the searches in the woods, detectives started looking closer, inside the Morphew home. Because sometimes the hardest place to find the truth is right where it's supposed to feel safe. For Mallory and Macy Morphew, the The days after their mother vanished were a blur of helicopters, reporters, and unanswered calls. They were hundreds of miles away on a camping trip when it happened, celebrating Mother's Day weekend the way their mum had encouraged them to. "I thought she'd text me back," Mallory later said, her voice breaking in a recorded interview. "I kept checking my phone. Nothing. It didn't make sense." The girls returned home to find their father pale, sleepless, and surrounded by police. He told them not to lose hope, that their mom would walk through the door any minute. But as hours turned into weeks, their belief began to crack. Friends who knew Suzanne described her as loving, but lately unsettled. She'd been open about her struggles. Battling breast cancer years earlier had changed her. She talked about wanting freedom, to feel alive again. Then came the messages. Police recovered texts Suzanne had sent to a close friend just weeks before she vanished. "I'm done. He's controlling everything. I can't keep pretending." In her journal, later found by investigators, Suzanne had written something even more haunting. "I want peace, even if it means leaving." Her daughters didn't know about those messages. They clung to the version of their mother they remembered, the woman who smiled through pain, who believed every storm had an end. But behind that smile, Suzanne had already begun her silent escape. Only no one realized how final it would be. When the search on the ground reached a dead end, investigators turned to what Suzanne had left behind: her phone, her Fitbit, and the data that never lies. Her iPhone's last signal came at 7:43 a.m. on Mother's Day, near her home. Then it went silent forever. Investigators found no outgoing messages, no calls, no signs she'd left the area on her own. Barry Morphew's phone, however, told a different story. That morning, while he claimed to be driving to Broomfield for work, his GPS showed erratic movements around the Morphew property, driving short loops, stopping near the trash bins, then returning home. At one point, his truck's data recorded a door opening and closing several times in rapid sequence, between 5:30 and 6 a.m. Even stranger, cell records showed Barry's phone had been set to airplane mode for nearly 5 hours that day, something he never mentioned. Detectives also recovered activity from his construction bobcat, a heavy machine capable of digging deep ground. Logs showed it had been moved early that morning, though Barry later claimed he didn't remember. Then came the surveillance footage. A neighbour's security camera caught Barry's truck leaving home earlier than he'd told police, loaded with something covered in a blue tarp. Bit by bit, the story of a biking accident was collapsing. One investigator summed it up quietly in his report. "Suzanne didn't ride that bike. Someone wanted us to believe she did." May 5th, 2021, almost a year to the day after Suzanne disappeared. At 9:15 in the morning, sheriff's deputies surrounded a construction site just outside Salida. Workers stepped back as officers in tactical gear moved in. Moments later, Barry Morphew, husband, father, landscaper, was led away in handcuffs. The news hit national headlines within hours. Husband of missing Colorado woman arrested for murder. Cameras swarmed the Chaffee County courthouse. Reporters shouted questions Barry didn't answer. Behind him, his 2 daughters sobbed, insisting their father was innocent. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and attempting to influence a public servant. In court, Barry stood silent, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. The once smiling husband from the family photos was now the prime suspect in one of Colorado's most haunting mysteries. But there was no body, no blood, no definitive crime scene. What prosecutors had were data points, inconsistencies, and a trail of behavior that painted a chilling picture. They claimed Barry killed Suzanne after discovering she wanted to leave him, then staged the bike ride to cover it up. Defense attorneys argued it was all guesswork and grief. Without a body, they said, there was no proof of death. Still, for many, the arrest felt like justice finally catching up. For others, especially two young daughters, it felt like losing both parents in a single day. And for the rest of the world, it was only the beginning. For a moment, it seemed justice had arrived. But then, almost as quickly as it began, the case against Barry Morphew started to crumble. In 2022, just days before the trial was set to begin, prosecutors made a stunning announcement. The murder charges were being dropped. They claimed new evidence had emerged, including leads pointing to a possible unknown suspect and difficulties locating Suzanne's body, which they still hoped to find in a remote, snow-covered area. The courtroom fell silent. Barry walked out a free man. His lawyers called it a vindication. They argued investigators had built a case on assumptions, not facts, that the husband had been turned into a villain by media hysteria. They filed a federal lawsuit against the district attorney's office and the sheriff's department, accusing them of wrongful prosecution and emotional damage. Meanwhile, the Morphew daughters stood by their father's side, speaking softly to cameras. "We just want peace. We just want our mum back." Across Colorado, people were divided. Some saw Barry as a man wrongly accused. Others saw a murderer who'd escaped on a technicality. In Salida, blue ribbons still fluttered on fences, faded by wind and time. The posters with Suzanne's face had curled and yellowed. The world had moved on. But in the hearts of those who'd searched those woods, one truth still echoed. You can drop the charges, but you can't bury the questions. September 2023. 3 years after Suzanne Morphew vanished, the mountains finally gave up their secret. A construction crew working near the small town of Moffat in Chaffee County, about 45 miles south of Salida, reported finding what looked like human remains. The site was remote, dry, almost lunar, scattered rocks, sagebrush, and the faint hum of desert wind. Within hours, crime scene tape fluttered in the dust. Deputies crouched over shallow soil as forensic teams brushed away layers of earth. When they lifted the remains into evidence bags, a hush fell over the site. DNA tests came back days later. It was her, Suzanne Morphew. After 3 years of hope, speculation, and silence, the mother who vanished on Mother's Day was finally found. But closure did not come easily. There were no clear signs of trauma, no bullet wounds, no definitive cause of death. Investigators ruled it a homicide, but the how and why were still buried in mystery. When the sheriff called Suzanne's family, her daughters reportedly broke down. "At least we can bring her home," one relative said through tears. The discovery reignited everything. The media storm, the suspicion, the grief, and for detectives who'd once doubted their own case, it felt like a voice from the grave whispering, "Don't stop now." Because in death, Suzanne Morphew had finally spoken, and her story wasn't finished yet. When the coroner's report was finally released in spring 2024, it shocked even the investigators who'd worked the case from the beginning. Suzanne Morphew had not been shot, stabbed, or strangled. Instead, toxicology tests revealed a rare and chilling cocktail in her system: butorphanol, azapirone, and medetomidine, a combination known in veterinary fields as BAM, a tranquilizer used to sedate large animals like elk or bears. Detectives immediately remembered something. Barry Morphew was an experienced hunter. He owned tranquilizer darts. And months before Suzanne's disappearance, he'd purchased the very drugs found in her body. The autopsy changed everything. It proved what many had suspected. Suzanne hadn't gone biking that morning at all. She'd been incapacitated, likely inside her own home, before her body was moved to the mountains where she was later found. Investigators reopened the case. This time, they had a body, a cause of death, and a motive: control, jealousy, betrayal. Friends told police Suzanne had planned to leave Barry for good. Texts between them painted a portrait of a marriage collapsing in silence. And so, 4 years after she vanished, the truth had begun to surface. But in Colorado, truth is never simple. Sometimes it rises from the dirt, one fragment at a time. June 2025. 5 years after that quiet Mother's Day morning, the mountains once again echoed with sirens. Barry Morphew was arrested, again. This time, the charges were stronger: first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and abuse of a corpse. Prosecutors presented the autopsy findings, GPS data, and digital messages as the spine of their renewed case. In court, Barry stood emotionless as the indictment was read. Reporters filled the gallery. Cameras clicked like gunfire. His defense called the new evidence circumstantial. But the public had already made up its mind. For Suzanne's family, the moment was both justice and heartbreak. Her brother said quietly to the press, "We prayed for answers. God gave them in His time." As of today, the case remains active. A trial is expected, and with it, perhaps, the final chapter of a story that's haunted Colorado for half a decade. But one truth endures. Suzanne Morphew didn't just disappear. She was silenced by someone who thought the mountains would keep their secret forever. They didn't. If you want to follow more untold stories like this one, mysteries that still echo through the quiet corners of America, like this video and subscribe to Silent Traces. Because every missing voice deserves to be heard,